Hi, welcome back. We're here for part two of a conversation with William Anderson, the editor of the new book, Selected Letters of Laura Ingalls Wilder. I thought I'd ask you too to tell students a little bit about your career as a Wilder scholar. You got started on Laura Ingalls Wilder at a very early age, if I remember correctly.
I did, and I have to mention that my professional career was as an educator, and although people will probably always associate me with Wilder, I've written about a lot of different topics and a lot of other books as well. I have to say that in self-defense. And I was one of the millions of American school kids in the 1960s that were indoctrinated with these books, and I know you shared that same experience. I think our parents took us to Rocky Ridge Farm about the same time. And in third grade, we studied the frontier, and our teacher read us Little House on the Prairie. We were all engrossed. We loved that book. And then in fourth grade, we heard another book of the series, fifth grade. And in retrospect, I realized that all of my elementary teachers vied for the chance to read those Wilder books to us. And they each had projects that they had us do. We did collaborative learning back in those days based on the Wilder books. And they are such good cross-curricular literature that we were doing some very modern activities in the classroom long before collaborative learning became a watchword in education. And I read all the books, and we had a assignment, I think in fifth grade. We were supposed to write to an author. And I was curious. I wanted to know what happened to the Ingalls and the Wilders after the books finished, because there were literally no extra supplemental pieces of literature around. And I thought, I'll write them a letter and ask them. But I looked in the World Book Encyclopedia, and I was too late. But there was a line in the World Book which said, their daughter, Rose Wilder Lane, 1886 is a novelist and journalist. And I thought, well, she's still alive. She's a writer, so she will count. So I wrote my author letter to Rose, and I got a response back from her. And I have about 6 or 8 letters from Rose Wilder Lane. And she told me to be sure to visit Rocky Ridge Farm, and she explained that Pa's fiddle was there, and on and on and on. So we made that visit. We later visited Al Manzo's boyhood home on another trip to the East Coast. So my parents were very supportive in indulging my interest in history and in these books as well. So at that time, I was able to meet people that knew the Wilders and heard all these wonderful stories and gleaned information here and there. And Mr. and Mrs. Lichty, who were the first curators at the Wilder home, said to me when I was very young, 13 or 14, I think, would you please write us a booklet with all these dates and stories and extra information, because our visitors want this kind of a thing. So the first I ever wrote was a little pamphlet called The Story of the Ingalls Family, and it was published, and that helped to raise funds for the museum that was built next to the house. So that's my start in not only writing, but in the Wilder, let's say, research and writing.
How did you feel when you were so young to get a letter back from Rose Wilder Lane? Did you expect to hear from her, or?
Of course. Of course. A lot of my classmates got a form letter from Beverly Cleary, and some didn't get any kind of a response, but I got a typed letter, and that was pretty impressive. On her letterhead stationery. And she also agreed to autograph books for me. So I made a package of books, including 2 of hers, and she signed them and sent them back. And that was very nice of her, because she was a busy person. She was active in her own thing and living in Connecticut and writing and following her own career and interest at that time. But she answered quite a few of the fan letters that her mother had previously answered, and she sent some of them to Mansfield for responses. But I'm really glad that I had that interaction with Rose.
I think that's remarkable. And what keeps you interested in Laura Ingalls Wilder? What draws you back to her work and life?
I have really not had much choice to drop it because as a college student, I spent a number of summers I realize now, on one of the greatest summer jobs ever. I worked in De Smet, South Dakota, the scene of 5 of the books, and gave tours, worked on restoration, did research for the Wilder Memorial Society there. And in that capacity, I met lots of local De Smet people that had firsthand relationships with the Ingalls family. They were children. The Ingalls family were elderly, pretty much. And Aubrey Sherwood, the editor of the De Smet News, was a wonderful mentor. And he would say, well, go back in the warehouse and you can go through the old bound newspaper files and let me know what you found. So I would find little nuggets of information. I discovered when Pa Ingalls built the Ingalls home, because there was a little one-liner in 1887 that he was digging the cellar and preparing to build a house in town. So that was a wealth of information, and I met some great people. And without knowing what I was doing, I was collecting all this oral history. And then I wrote other booklets because the literature was non-existent and the tourists were interested and fascinated. And it just went on and on and on until HarperCollins asked me to do Laura Ingalls Wilder, a biography, and book after book after book.
Why do you think there's such a resurgence in Laura Ingalls Wilder right now? I don't know about you, but I've been surprised that so many people suddenly seem drawn to her at this point in time.
I think it's always been there, but now there's more of a forum. There's a way to express their intense interest with the internet, with your courses. I think the publication of Pioneer Girl a little over a year ago really increased the public consciousness of her, because there was such a wonderful publicity on the book, and people that sort of demeaned it as a television series of not much consequence realized that this is really a great American author. And I think that was a great enhancement to the Wilder fascination when you did your work with Pioneer Girl.
Thank you. Well, I certainly hope that more people will go back to Laura Ingalls Wilder's Little House books and read them, because I think they will discover maybe a character and a series of stories that may surprise them. Because I think, as we've talked before, that in popular culture, Little House on the Prairie means a television series, and the books are meatier and have a lot more, I think, more depth. I think books in general can give more depth to a story than television and film, and I think the public is in for a surprise if they haven't read her books.
I think so, and I believe that there's a much wider adult readership than there was when we were exposed to these books, because they were niched in elementary education, and children's books did not have quite the clout and importance in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s as they do now. Children's book writers are not second-rate writers as maybe they were considered back then. And I think parents knew that their children were hearing these books in school, and parents would say to teachers, I thought this Laura Ingalls was a new kid in the classroom because my children keep talking about her all the time. And I think parents knew she was something connected with reading and children's literature, but that whole field is much larger and respected more now than it was when we were growing up. And I think we have a lot of people that were exposed to the books as we were as children that have never lost a fascination with them as adults, and they pass them on to their children and their family members. So Little House is handed down from generation to generation.
I think you're absolutely right. Well, thank you for joining me, Bill. It's been a pleasure to talk to William Anderson, who knows so much about Wilder. He's a leading world authority on her life and work. Thank you for joining us, and stay tuned for more about Laura Ingalls Wilder.